the first sign that you're the one the supply narcissist couldn't replace. It's because you set boundaries and didn't break. That right there is the biggest slap to a narcissist's ego. See, narcissists are hunters. They don't look for love. They look for control. They want submission disguised as affection. And when they find someone who says no, someone who knows their worth and isn't afraid to walk away from disrespect, oh, they remember you forever. Let me tell you something. Setting boundaries isn't just about telling people what they can't do to you. It's about showing people what you won't tolerate. And when you do that consistently, when you stand firm, no matter how many love bombs, guilt trips, or silent treatments they throw at you, you show them they can't bend you. That kind of strength isn't just rare. It's terrifying to someone who feeds off weakness. And let's be real here, boundaries make manipulators uncomfortable. Why? Because manipulation can't thrive where there are clear lines. The narcissist didn't expect you to have those lines. They thought you'd be like the rest. Smile, submit, forgive the unforgivable, and stay just to feel seen. But you said, no, I don't care how good the apologies sound. I don't care how charming you act when you want something. If you cross me, that's it. You didn't just draw the line. You enforced it. And that's what shook them. Now, here's the part they never saw coming. You weren't bluffing. A lot of people talk about boundaries, but when they're tested, they fold. They stay after the lies, after the disrespect, after the betrayal. But you didn't just speak your worth. You acted on it. You followed through. You showed them there are consequences to playing with you. And they'll never forget that. That kind of discipline, that's a level most people never reach. And that's exactly why they couldn't replace you. See, narcissists are always searching for their next supply, a new source of admiration, control, validation. But every time they find someone new, they measure them against you. They think about how they could walk all over someone else, but they couldn't walk over you. They think about how they could spin lies and play games with others, but with you. They were exposed. They were uncomfortable. You didn't buy it. And that haunts them. And you didn't just make them feel small by calling them out. You made them realize they don't actually have power over people who know themselves. And that's the key. You know yourself. You weren't looking for someone to complete you. You weren't willing to trade your peace for proximity. And you sure as hell weren't going to stay in a situation where your voice, your value, and your truth were dismissed just to stroke someone else's ego. Let me break it down a little deeper. Boundaries don't just protect your space. They expose who's trying to invade it. When you said, I won't allow disrespect, and they tried anyway, that's not love. That's testing. And you passed that test not by reacting, not by explaining yourself over and over, but by removing access. You didn't raise your voice. You raised your standards. They tried to come back. Oh yeah, they always do. The texts, the late night calls, the I miss you messages that show up after a few drinks. Because they know what they lost. And don't let them fool you. When a narcissist gets replaced, they move on quickly. But when you walk away, when you stop playing their game, when you cut the cord, it shakes their identity. It messes with their sense of control because they can't control someone who doesn't need them. And that's the part that sticks. Not just that you left, not just that you said enough, but that you meant it, that you didn't come crawling back, that you didn't settle for breadcrumbs, that you didn't let loneliness confuse you into thinking it was love. You stood tall in your decision. And that's the kind of energy they'll never forget. That's the kind of energy that makes them say, I can't replace that. Because the truth is, they didn't love you. They loved what they could get from you. But once they realized they couldn't manipulate you, they lost their grip. You weren't giving them ego boosts anymore. You weren't reacting. You weren't chasing. You weren't begging. You became unavailable. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And narcissists don't chase what they can't control. But they do obsess over it. You know what's funny? They might act like you didn't matter. They might post like they're thriving. They might pretend they found someone better. But deep down, they know they're not going to find another one like you. Someone who brought value, someone who told the truth, someone who stood their ground, someone who didn't settle for being a pawn in their little game. And that's what makes you unforgettable. So when they sit with their new supply, who's probably easier to manipulate, quicker to forgive, more desperate to please, they'll think of you. Not because they miss what you gave them, but because they missed the challenge, the strength, the mirror you held up, the fact that you didn't lose yourself to keep them, the fact that when they crossed the line, you didn't just call them out, you cut them off. And let's not forget there's power in being the one who walks away, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You saw the patterns, you saw the game, and you refused to keep playing. That decision, that quiet exit, that's what echoes in their mind. Because now they're left chasing people they can control while secretly longing for the one they couldn't. You didn't just set boundaries, you embodied them. You didn't just survive the narcissist, you outgrew them. You leveled up, you healed, And even if they try to come back, even if they try to test the door, you already locked it, threw away the key, and built a better version of yourself on the other side. That's why they can't replace you. You were their mirror, and they hated it. That's the second reason the narcissist couldn't replace you. See, most people feed their ego. They stroke it, tiptoe around it, coddle it. But you reflected it. You didn't hold up a fantasy version of them. You held up the truth. And for someone who's built their entire identity around illusions, that kind of reflection is both terrifying and unforgettable. Let me break it down. Narcissists survive by pretending. They pretend they're smarter than they are, kinder than they are, deeper than they are. They curate this perfect image, this polished mask, and they expect everyone around them to support it. But you didn't. You saw through it. You saw the cracks. You didn't worship the false image. They could manipulate you into seeing something that wasn't there. And that's what shook them. They wanted applause, but you gave them accountability. They wanted admiration, but you gave them honesty. And that right there, that's why they still think about you. That's why no matter who they move on to, it doesn't hit the same. Because you didn't feed their fantasy, you challenged their reality. And that made you dangerous in their world. Now, here's the twist when someone's truly confident, they appreciate being seen. They welcome feedback. They want to grow. But narcissists, they don't want growth. They want praise. They don't want to be known. They want to be adored. So when you called them out, when you questioned their actions, when you pointed out the inconsistencies, they didn't feel loved. They felt exposed. And let me tell you something, being exposed by someone who matters to them, that hits different. Because deep down, they knew your perception carried weight. You weren't just anybody. You were someone who held value, someone they respected, maybe even envied. So when you saw the truth and didn't pretend otherwise, it rattled them in a way they couldn't shake off. You didn't scream. You didn't humiliate them. You just looked at them with clear eyes and said, I see you. And that's more powerful than any argument. That's more damaging than any insult. Because narcissists can justify attacks. They can spin drama, but they can't argue with calm truth. And that's exactly what you brought. And listen, you weren't trying to be cruel. You weren't trying to break them down. You were just being real, but that's what made you irreplaceable. And most people are either too afraid or too unaware to challenge a narcissist's mask. But you didn't just challenge it, you made it unnecessary. You gave them a chance to drop the act. You gave them space to be real. And they didn't know what to do with it. See, they didn't want authenticity. They wanted obedience. They wanted someone who would say, you're right, even when they were wrong. They wanted someone who would say, it's okay, even when they were reckless. But you weren't about to co-sign self-destruction. You weren't about to stand silent while they disrespected you, others, or themselves. You didn't play dumb to keep the peace. You told the truth, even when it cost you comfort. And here's what they didn't realize until it was too late. You weren't criticizing them. You were inviting them to grow. You were giving them the opportunity to rise, to become better, to step into something real, but they didn't take it because growth requires humility. And narcissists don't do humility. They do control. They do image. They do manipulation, but they don't do mirrors because mirrors reveal what they're desperate to hide. So when you looked at them and said, this isn't love, or you're not being honest, or that behavior's not okay, you weren't attacking them. You were just reflecting what was already there. And that's why they couldn't stay. That's why they ran, because they couldn't stand the version of themselves they saw in your presence. But don't get it twisted. They miss it. They miss you, not just for how you made them feel, but for how you made them see. Even if they couldn't handle it, even if they didn't say it, even if they tried to discard you, you left a mark. You shifted something. Because once someone's seen by you, they can't unsee themselves. And that discomfort, that realization, that's why they can't forget you. No new supply will do what you did. No one else will speak the truth and still love them through it. No one else will offer honesty with grace. Everyone else will either enable them or fear them. But you told them the truth because you believed in them, because you hoped they'd rise to the level you saw in them. You gave them a chance to be better, and they fumbled it. And now they're stuck trying to replicate that connection with people who can't see beyond the mask. They'll act like they've moved on. They'll post like they're thriving. They'll say you were too much, too critical, too intense. But you and I both know the truth. What they call criticism was just clarity. What they call control was just conviction. What they call too much was just your unwillingness to settle for too little. And that right there, that's power. You didn't fall for the charm. You didn't get blinded by the game. You didn't let the sweet words silence your intuition. You looked past all that straight into the soul and said, I know who you are and I won't let you pretend around me. That's the kind of energy that doesn't just walk into someone's life. That's rare. That's real. That's unforgettable. And now they're haunted by the reflection, not because you hurt them, but because you held up a version of themselves they couldn't deny and weren't ready to become. You became a living reminder of the person they could have been if they had chosen growth over ego, truth over image, and love over control. That's why they couldn't replace you. If he cheated, you didn't just cry. You didn't just break. You didn't collapse under the weight of betrayal. You responded. And that response, the strength, the clarity, the way you reclaimed your dignity, that's exactly why he couldn't replace you. Because a narcissist expects to be forgiven. He expects to be begged for attention. He expects you to shrink so he can feel big. But when you got hit with disrespect, you did something he didn't see coming. You stood up. You stood tall. You did something that made it clear you're not the one to play with. Let's tell the truth here. Cheating isn't a mistake. It's a choice. It's a deliberate act of betrayal. And when someone chooses to cheat, they're not just disrespecting the relationship. They're gambling on your self-worth. They're hoping you'll stay quiet. They're hoping you'll cry it out, heal in silence, and take them back like nothing happened. But you didn't play that game. You flipped the whole table. You matched the betrayal with boundaries. You matched the deception with distance. And maybe, just maybe, you gave him a taste of the pain he tried to hand you. Not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Because when someone shows you they don't value loyalty, that's your green light to value yourself even more. And that's exactly what you did. That moment, that turning point, was when you became unforgettable. Because narcissists don't expect accountability. They expect to control the narrative. It was just a mistake. It didn't mean anything. You weren't giving me enough. You've heard all the excuses. They try to twist it, flip it, dump the blame at your feet. But when you saw through all of that and said, I don't care how you spin it. I know what I deserve. It flipped the entire script. He wanted you confused. He wanted you insecure. But you were clear. You were solid. And that's what scared him. That's what made him panic. That's what made him spiral, because he realized he just lost access to something real. He thought he could cheat and still keep you in his pocket, like you didn't have options, like you didn't have strength, like you didn't have a backbone. But oh, did you prove him wrong? You didn't just leave a relationship. You left a system, a cycle, a trap. And narcissists hate losing someone who refuses to be manipulated. They hate losing someone who wakes up, someone who won't be gaslit, someone who sees the betrayal and responds with power instead of passivity. Because the truth is, what you did, that shook his ego more than anything else could have. You became the evidence that he's not as untouchable as he thinks. And listen, maybe you didn't even walk away right away. Maybe it took a little time. Maybe you stayed longer than you should have. But the moment you decided, the moment you chose yourself over him, that's when everything changed. That moment was loud, even if you were silent, because it told him, I'm done playing small for your comfort. That's not a moment they forget. You see, when a narcissist cheats, it's not even about attraction. It's about power. It's about control. It's about seeing if they can get away with disrespect and still have you stick around. It's about proving to themselves that no matter how low they go, you'll still stay high on them. But when you didn't tolerate it, when you stopped answering, stopped explaining, stopped giving them access, they felt something they rarely feel: powerlessness. That's why they couldn't replace you, because people who carry themselves with self-respect leave a void that flattery can't fill. You might found someone else to entertain in, someone else to post with, someone else to say all the right things. But deep down, he knows it's not you, because you didn't just love him, you held him accountable. You didn't just give him attention, you gave him standards. You didn't let him stay small. So you demanded something higher. And that kind of love, that kind of presence, it doesn't come around twice. It doesn't get replaced by a rebound or a situationship. It lingers, it echoes, especially when the new person doesn't require him to rise. Because he might thought he wanted easy. He might thought he wanted someone who wouldn't challenge him. But now he sees the difference. Now he realizes what it means to lose someone who actually knew their worth. He'll try to recreate the feeling. He'll try to mirror your energy with someone new, but it won't land, because he didn't just lose a partner. He lost a mirror, a muse, a motivator. He lost someone who saw him and still believed he could be better until he proved otherwise. And when you walked, you didn't walk bitter, you walked built from experience, built from healing, built from clarity. And that's a version of you he'll never get to meet again. So if you ever wonder why he keeps circling back, why he checks your page, why he reaches out with those hope you're well messages, no, it's not love. It's regret. Regret that he thought he could treat you like an option. Regret that he bet against your strength. Regret that he pushed away the one person who wouldn't play small to protect his ego. You showed him what it looks like when love has boundaries. You showed him that betrayal comes with consequences. And you showed him that walking away is not weakness, it's wisdom. That's what makes you the one he couldn't replace. You were different because you didn't need the spotlight, you were the light. And that's what destroyed him. That's what he couldn't replace. See, narcissists thrive on being the center of attention. They want the room to revolve around them. They want people orbiting their needs, their moods, their drama. And when they meet someone who doesn't chase validation, someone who's already whole, already grounded, already glowing with their own energy, that shakes them in a way nothing else can. You weren't desperate for approval. You didn't bend over backwards to be chosen. You weren't trying to perform for love or beg for scraps. You were the value. And when you entered that relationship, you weren't looking for someone to complete you. You were looking for someone who could complement the power you already carried. But what happened? He wasn't ready for that. He wasn't prepared for someone who didn't need him to feel complete. He wanted control, not connection. He wanted praise, not partnership. And you didn't give it to him. Not because you were cold, not because you didn't care, but because you weren't impressed by manipulation and you weren't moved by shallow flattery. You didn't feed his ego, you challenged it. And that made him feel small, not because you made him small, but because standing next to your light exposed just how dim he really was. That's what made him insecure. That's what made him envious. That's what made him want to dim you. He saw how people gravitated to you without you even trying. You didn't have to post for attention. You didn't have to lie for sympathy. You didn't have to create chaos to be noticed. Your presence spoke before your words ever did. The way you carried yourself, the way you treated people, the way you moved through life with purpose that intimidated him. And instead of rising to match it, he tried to pull you down. Because let's be honest, when someone is insecure, they don't want a strong partner. They want a dependent one, someone who needs reassurance, someone they can keep beneath them emotionally. But you weren't that. You weren't the one asking, am I enough? You were the one saying, do you even deserve me? And that shift in energy, that confidence, that's what set you apart from every other person he's ever dealt with. He thought he could dim you. He thought he could poke at your insecurities, make you question yourself, make you doubt your intuition. But every time he tried to play that game, you reminded him you don't break easily. You don't fold for fear. You don't shrink to be loved. You stayed solid. Even when he tried to make you feel small, you kept showing up as the version of you that refused to settle. And let me tell you something that light. It's not loud. It doesn't have to be. And you didn't have to yell to be heard. You didn't have to beg to be valued. You just were. Your love was honest. Your intentions were pure. And when you walked in the room, you didn't have to prove anything. You were the proof of what grace looks like, of what quiet power feels like, of what it means to love someone while still choosing yourself. And you know what really got to him? You were whole before him, and you stayed whole after him. He didn't break you. He didn't define you. He didn't get the satisfaction of knowing you fell apart in his absence. Because even if it hurt, and let's not lie, betrayal hurts. You used that pain as fuel. You used it to rise. You used it to heal. And that healing, that growth, that glow up, that's something he can't stand to see, but can't look away from either. See, he thought you needed him to shine. But what he didn't realize is you were the source. And when someone is used to feeding on others for validation, someone who creates their worth by being admired, they panic when they meet someone who doesn't need anyone to feel whole. Because when you're self-sufficient emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, they can't leverage your insecurity. They can't manipulate your doubt. You didn't give him anything to control, and that's why he'll never forget you. He probably told people you were too much, that you were intimidating. But deep down, he knows what it really was. You were just too secure for someone who feeds on insecurity. You were too wise for someone who survives on games. You were too peaceful for someone addicted to chaos. You didn't chase drama, so you didn't stay in his web. And because of that, he couldn't keep you. And worse, he couldn't replace you. Now he's looking for you in every new person, trying to find your light in someone who's still searching for their own, trying to recreate the energy, the confidence, the peace, the purpose. But all he's finding are people who need him more than they know themselves. And deep down, he misses you not because you made him feel powerful, but because you made him feel seen without even trying. You didn't have to say, I'm the prize, you just were. And when someone realizes they lost something rare, they scramble. They either self-destruct or pretend it never happened. But no matter what he does, you live rent-free in the part of his mind that knows he'll never level up until he meets someone else who can reflect your light. And let's be honest, he's not ready for that. He wasn't ready then, and he's probably not ready now. Because people like you, people who radiate from within, people who know themselves, love themselves, and don't dim for anyone, you don't come around often. And when you do, you change the atmosphere, you raise the bar. And for someone who thought they were the sun, it's humbling to realize you were the whole sky. That's why he couldn't replace you. You didn't just touch his life, you elevated it. And that's the thing he couldn't duplicate, couldn't replicate, couldn't find again, no matter how many new people he entertained. Because when you came into his life, you didn't just bring attention or affection, you brought alignment. You brought structure. You brought focus. You brought peace. You were the one who calmed the chaos, who gave his life direction when he didn't even know he was spinning out. And when someone like that walks away, it leaves more than just a silence, it leaves a void. A narcissist thrives in disorder. Confusion is their comfort zone. They manipulate, gaslight, and create emotional whirlwinds because that's how they feel in control. But you came in and started clearing out the fog. You weren't afraid to ask the hard questions. You weren't afraid to bring clarity where they were used to confusion. You brought stability, and in doing that, you made the dysfunction uncomfortable. You showed him a life beyond the chaos, and he didn't know how to handle it. It's wild how someone can crave peace, but still sabotage it when they don't feel worthy of it. You were that peace. You were that reminder of what life could feel like without the games. You brought out his best. Maybe you encouraged him to go after his goals. Maybe you helped him see his potential. Maybe you showed him how to love deeper, trust better, or think differently. Whatever it was, you didn't just exist in his life, you improved it. And that shook him because now he had something to lose. See, when you've always been surrounded by people who tolerate your toxicity, you don't expect someone to come in and offer transformation. You don't expect someone to push you toward purpose instead of just stroking your ego. You don't expect someone to say, I see who you are, but I also see who you could be. That's what you did. You didn't just meet him at his level, you challenged him to rise. And rising requires work. Rising means letting go of old patterns. Rising means confronting your demons. And let's be honest, he wasn't ready for that. So instead of growing with you, he resented you. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you reminded him of everything he was refusing to become. You were the mirror again, but this time, not just reflecting who he was, but reflecting who he could have been if he'd stepped into alignment instead of avoidance. And people like that, people who are stuck in survival mode, they don't value peace until they've lost it. He thought he wanted someone to love him, but what you gave him was something deeper, structure. You gave his life shape. You brought balance to his imbalance. You were the calming voice when he was spiraling. You were the one who said, this isn't who you are when he started slipping. And even if he never admitted it out loud, even if he made you feel like it went unnoticed, he felt it. He leaned on it more than he'll ever confess. And now that it's gone, he's trying to fill the gap with distractions, but nothing sticks. Because people can bring you entertainment, but not elevation. They can bring attention, but not alignment. They can flatter your ego, but they won't challenge your soul. And that's the difference between you and everyone else he's tried to replace you with. They can't bring what you brought. They don't have the spiritual strength, the emotional depth, the mental clarity that you walked in with. They're showing up to play the part, but you were the real thing. And here's what really makes it sting. He knows it. He knows he fumbled someone who genuinely had his back. He knows he lost someone who wasn't trying to use him, but truly cared about him, even when he didn't deserve it. He knows you saw more in him than he saw in himself. That's the kind of loss that haunts a man. That's the kind of love that gets under your skin and stays there. And now that he's left with the noise again, the drama, the emptiness, the shallow connections, he can't unremember what peace felt like. He can't unreel the way you showed up with consistency, with clarity, with direction. Because peace is addictive when you've tasted it. And you weren't just peaceful, you were purposeful. You helped him make sense of things that used to leave him confused. You brought order to his mess, light to his dark, wisdom to his foolishness. And whether he admits it or not, that changed him. He's not going to find that again. Not because no one else is capable, but because very few people are willing to show up like that. Most people want something. Most people are transactional. But you gave from the overflow. You loved from a place of abundance, not lack. You weren't trying to fix him. You just believed in him. And now he's chasing that feeling again in places where it never existed to begin with. He might try to act like he's winning. He might be out there pretending you never mattered. But people don't pretend unless they're hiding something. People don't overperform unless they're covering pain. And you don't have to perform because you didn't lose anything. You left something. You walked away from dysfunction, from gaslighting, from disrespect, from chaos. You didn't just leave him. You rescued yourself. And he knows it. That's why he can't replace you. Because what you brought into his life wasn't a trend, a phase, or a fling. It was transformation. You shifted the energy. You raised the bar. You rewrote what love was supposed to look like. And now, every connection that lacks that same depth, that same growth, that same piece, it just reminds him of what he had and what he'll never have again. That's why he couldn't replace you. You knew when to walk away. That alone made you irreplaceable. Because a narcissist doesn't expect that. They don't plan for it. They build the whole game on the belief that you'll stay, even after the damage. They thrive off the push and pull, create chaos, get caught, cry a little love bomb, and start again. That cycle is their home. But when you broke it, when you said, This is enough, and actually meant it. You shattered the very foundation of the control they thought they had over you. They always think they've got one more chance, one more lie to tell, one more apology to fake, one more trick to pull. But what they don't understand is that some people are only patient until they wake up. And once you woke up, once you really saw it for what it was, you stopped hoping they'd change. You stopped making excuses. You stopped lowering your standards just to keep someone who never deserved you in the first place. Walking away wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was clarity. It was wisdom. And here's what made it powerful. You didn't just leave the relationship, you left the role they tried to assign you. You stopped being the fixer. You stopped being the emotional punching bag. You stopped being the one who carried the weight while they played the victim. You chose yourself. You chose your peace. You chose your future. And that's something they will never forget, no matter how hard they try. See, they wanted you broken. They wanted you unsure. They wanted you second guessing your worth so they could keep feeding off of it. Because when someone like that senses your strength, they don't try to build with you. They try to break you just enough to stay in control. That's the whole game. So when you ended it, when you cut the cord, when you walked out and didn't turn back, it left a scar. Not just because they lost you, but because they lost the power to make you doubt yourself. They always think they're the prize, but you were the one who brought peace to chaos, loyalty to betrayal, clarity to confusion. And the day you walked away was the day they realized too late that you were the one they needed more than you ever needed them. That's why they couldn't replace you. Because you didn't just leave, they got exposed. Exposed for the manipulations, the gaslighting, the games. You walking away forced them to look at the truth. And narcissists can't stand that kind of mirror. But you didn't just walk, you healed. That's another reason he couldn't move on. Because you didn't spiral the way he expected. You didn't blow up his phone. You didn't beg. You didn't try to convince him of your worth. You let him go. And then you grew. Quietly, strongly, unapologetically. And every step you took away from that dysfunction, you were reclaiming pieces of yourself that he tried to take. That healing, that self-respect, that's what haunts him now. Let's be real, he thought you'd come back. He thought the silence was temporary. He thought eventually the pain would bring you back to him. But you didn't make your healing loud. You didn't announce it. You just moved in silence, grew in peace, and evolved in ways he never saw coming. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need to prove a point. Your growth became the proof. The kind of proof that doesn't require words because it radiates through presence. He sees it. Whether he says it or not, he feels it. That shift in you, that confidence in you, that's not something he can fake. And it's not something he'll find in someone else. Because most people don't have the courage to leave what's familiar, even when it hurts. Most people stay, but you left. And you didn't just walk away from him, you walked away from a pattern that was never worthy of you. That's what makes you powerful. That's what makes you unforgettable. And now, he's searching. He's bouncing from one distraction to the next, trying to fill a gap that only someone like you could occupy. But it's empty, not because other people aren't trying, but because they're not you. They didn't walk with grace through hell. They didn't love him through the chaos. They didn't leave with their head high, their dignity intact, and their soul still glowing. They're not built like you. And deep down, he knows it. That's the irony. He thought you were the easy one to replace. But he didn't realize that the moment you said, I'm done, you stepped into a version of yourself that no one else helped you reach. You leveled up in silence. You chose peace over chaos, boundaries over begging, and purpose over pain. And now, you don't even want what you once cried for. That's the real win. Not just that you left, but that you healed to the point where you wouldn't even go back if he begged. And if he does beg, if he ever reaches out, trying to circle back, trying to rekindle, you'll know exactly why. Not because he's changed, not because he finally sees your value, but because he finally feels the loss. And that loss, that's the echo of a woman who didn't wait for him to choose her. She chose herself. That's why he couldn't replace you.